Greetings from Tokyo, I'm Trip, and welcome to the Hammer of Wrath. This week, you and I are going to paint some vampire hunters. Let's go. Thanks for joining me in the studio. This week, we finally take our first steps into the world of Mordheim. I tried to resist, but there is something about the allure of a game that's been out of print for 25 years that my compulsive brain simply cannot resist. So today we are going to create our first warband, the Witch Hunters. But first, I want to talk very briefly about autumn festivals in Japan. Now, I have mentioned in other videos that in Japan, there is no shortage of festivals all year round. Delightfully, the Japanese seem to take any excuse to throw a party. But in my experience, there are more of them in the autumn, and the intro to this video was shot at a small local festival celebrating the end of summer and the approach of winter. A sort of last hurrah celebrating the final few days of decent weather before the doldrums of winter set in. Now, my favorite thing about these festivals is always the food vendors. Of course, you can find the usual suspects at a Japanese festival, like yakisoba or pan-fried noodles, kakigori, shaved ice with flavoring on top, and karage, fried chicken. But you'll also find some more international offerings, like crepes, and of course, kebab, which seems to be strangely popular here. Well, that's enough discussing the small festivals that celebrate the end of summer here in Japan. Let's talk about Mordheim. As I mentioned, I finally caved in and fell down a deep, deep rabbit hole when it came to Mordheim, downloaded the PDF of the out-of-print rules, read it cover to cover, and began scouring the internet for different warband builds. Now, as it turns out, I had already picked up Hexbane's Hunters, and as I was perusing the Warband build guide, I realized they'd make the perfect start to a Witch Hunter's Warband. So let me show you how I used modern Warhammer miniatures to create my first Mordheim Warband. We're going to start by priming the miniatures with Vallejo polyurethane primer through the airbrush. This is how I base coat all of my miniatures, but if you don't have an airbrush, this primer actually brushes on really well. Now once that's dry, we're going to do a top-down zenithal or highlight pass using a white primer. Here I'm just using this to help describe the shapes on the models and help me understand where the shadows need to be and where the highlights need to be. Also, when we apply our layer paints on top, we're going to get a much more saturated pure color over the white. Now the first step I'm going to do here is paint up the bases. I'm going to make these match my Cursed City bases. So we're going to lay down some Army Painter Thunderhawk blue, and then I'll apply a light dry brush of Fenrisian gray from Games Workshop to bring out all the highlights. And for a final step, a generous wash of Coelia green shade to make a match to the Cursed City tiles. Now once that's dry, we're going to use another contrast paint. This is Plague Bearer Flesh, and I'm going to apply that over all the puddles and standing water that are on the bases here. With our spare gold, after purchasing all of our Witch Hunters and their gear, we were able to add 2 hounds. Here I'm going to make one brown and the other black to just sort of differentiate them visually. And once we get our base coats down over our zenithals, we're just going to apply some washes. In this case, I'm using contrast Basilicanum Gray over top. That's going to accentuate our shadows and pull away from the highlights. And then afterwards, we can just quickly dry brush them and do the collars to be done with them. We've hired out 3 Witch Hunters, and we're going to use Hexbane Hunters from the Underworlds game. And starting with Brydget Axwold, we're going to hew pretty close to the box art on this one. I'm going to use a sort of desaturated steely blue on the pants. And then for the leather coat here, we're going to use a really interesting color from the Army Painter. This is Basilisk Red, and it's a very desaturated, almost maroon red. And then we're going to use a couple different browns for the belts and satchels and handles of the wood. No 2 leathers are the same. So we'll just work our way around the model using some different browns for all the different pouches and the sheaths on the axes and her boots and gloves and things like that. Now we'll do the metallics around here. That includes the shin guards and the axe heads as well as the pistol. And once we've got that done, we'll do some flesh. This is Cadian flesh tone from Games Workshop. And as you can see, once we've got all our basic colors laid in, the model's very plain, but we're going to use this sort of secret sauce here. You know, washes are often called talent in a bottle, and these washes from the Army Paint are actually kind of special. They seem to be suspended in this gel substrate, which means they're a little thicker, but they do pull away from the highlights and they sort of stay where you put them. They don't run like a Games Workshop wash. So I find them really great for doing things like shading leathers and coats and things like that. So we're going to use Army Painter Strong Tone here. We'll just put that everywhere except for the face. And then you can see there's a big difference in the model here. It's brought out all the shadow values. Then we'll go through and pull out some highlights. We'll go back to those pure colors and hit the uppermost ridges to bring out the highlights and sort of reshape, reform the model, bring out the contrast in it. Now on the face, I'm going to use Reikland Flesh Shade, and that will be done. We're going to move on to our second one here. This is Quiet Pock, apparently. Strange name, I don't know. To me, he's just going to be a vampire hunter in Mordheim. I like this guy, though, because he's got a decent set of armor on. He comes with this really great crossbow that actually shoots bombs. That's not an option. You can bring in Mordheim, of course, but you can bring a crossbow, so we'll kit him out with that in our data sheet. Here, I'm going to stick, again, kind of close to the official paint scheme. I'm going to use a lot of dark browns and leathers. This is Fur Brown from the Army Painter, and I'm going to use a contrast paint here. This is Contrast Wildwood, and I'm going to use that on the leather of his boots. This is straight out of the pot, and as you can see, it just goes right over top of our white base. We just have to be really careful here, make sure we're not getting it onto the base, so we're going to use some control, get it in there. I'm not worried about the armor panels above, but I don't want to get it into the mud or on the tiles. We'll use that on the gloves as well, and once we've got those set in, I'm going to use Mournfang Brown from Games Workshop to bring out the leather straps. Again, no two leathers are the same color, right? So the boots and the straps different color here, create some visual interest. And then I'm going to use Lead Belcher on all the armor plates. Lead Belcher, probably my favorite paint in the entire Games Workshop range. The metallics in the Army Painter range are almost as good, and I do use those in some of the miniatures coming up, and you'll be able to see that. But my go-to when doing sort of a middle value metal is Lead Belcher. So we'll apply that all over the model. We're just going to work our way around here. We'll do his shin guards, we'll do his mask, and then we'll move on to this breastplate. What's cool about these is they're all made out of like this beaten metal, and it's got a lot of really nice surface texture to it. These are not knights in shining armor. These are mercenaries that have seen a dozen paid battles, skirmishes in the streets, and they don't have the money to buy new gear all the time. And we want that to look like it is worn and beat up and maybe not taken the best care of. So we're going to go back to the Army Painter Strong Tone and apply that all over, get our shadows and recesses, bring out all of our details. And then once that's dry, we'll go back through and bring out our highlights. Here I'm using Wolf Gray from the Army Painter and a stippling pattern to sort of mimic a rough-hewn fabric. Then we'll bring out our highlights on the overshirt. And here on the cape, we'll go back to Fur Brown and bring out the highlights and the uppermost ripples, again, to sort of re-accentuate that definition. Miniatures are all about exaggeration. You want dark darks and light lights. Our next witch hunter is Hexbane himself. Now, we are not going to use him for our witch hunter captain, as you'll see in just a moment, but we are going to stick pretty closely at, as you can see here, I have a friend who's quote-unquote helping. This is Tarako, my son's pet parakeet, who likes to sit on my hand and peck at the models as I try and paint them. He means well, but he's not as helpful as he thinks he is. We're going to dry brush the coat and hat here with two varying lightnesses of gray to bring up our highlights quickly and easily. And then once we've got that where we want it to be, we're going to, again, stick pretty close to the box art here, and we're going to go back to Basilisk Red for the inner lining of the coat and his pants. And once we've got that down, we're going to use Contrast Wildwood on the handle of the torch and also his boots. Again, this is really great for getting an instant dark leather color. We're just going to be very careful here, use our 000 brush, and make sure we're not getting that onto the base. Now we're going to add an additional detail to the back of the coat here. This is Vallejo Burnt Umber mixed 1-to-1 with water and then applied to the bottom edge of the coat. And then I'll take a damp brush and blend in that top edge. And once that's dry, we'll take the umber straight off the palette and just dab that along the bottom to create flecks of mud along his waistcoat. and then we'll move on to our metallics. Now he's got a breastplate and some shin guards as well as some pauldrons here, so we'll just very carefully use lead belcher to cover all those areas, as well as the hammer on his hip here. And these pauldrons, which actually have 2 layers, there's a larger layer by the collar, which we want to be very careful we don't get any on that red color, and then there's sort of an under layer that goes next to his sleeve. So we'll just very carefully apply our metallics and then move on to the torch. Now this is demon yellow from the army painter. It's sort of like a pale sun yellow. It has decent coverage for a yellow, but we're still going to need 2 coats. So we'll apply 2 coats of that to the torch. And a really easy way to do flame is to just start dry brushing. So I'm going to brace this against my finger so I don't snap it off, but we're going to dry brush some varying values of orange and red as we move towards the end of the flame. And that's going to leave the yellows in the deepest, hottest recesses. And then finally we'll end with a charcoal color on the edge here as it goes to smoke at the end. And we get a really quick flame effect. Now, I'm going to use Agrax Earthshade on the leathers here just to sort of switch things up and give it a slightly different appearance. I do like to use different washes to create different effects, and we don't want all the leathers to look the same on all the characters. But when we go to the metallics here, I'm going to go back to the Army Painter Strong Tone. This just behaves really well. I love the way it looks over metallics, and it adds an aged or patinaed appearance to them. Now, the final model in the Hexbane Hunter's box is going to serve as our warrior priest. This is Aemos Duncarrow. He's a hulk of a man, and I think that's perfect for a warrior priest. And you can kit out a warrior priest with a 2-handed axe in Mordheim, so we'll go ahead and do that. Again, we're going to stick pretty close to the box art, but in this case I've changed the color of his undershirt from a drab gray color to something a little more earth-toned. That's going to look really good once we put the washes on it. Here I'm using Mordheim Brown from Games Workshop on all the leathers. That's, I think these are called spats. This is a very sort of old piece of accoutrement that goes over your boots but then goes under. I think the last time these were worn by any sort of military force was World War I. It's definitely got a strong retro vibe to it. And of course, we're going to use lead belcher on all our metallics here. He's got a really heavy set of pauldrons and this chest piece with a really thick gorget with all these spikes on it. Exactly what you'd want on a vampire hunter, right? Vampire goes to try and bite him in the neck, takes a steel spike in the face instead. Now, on the skin tones, we want him to have a darker skin tone, so I'm actually going to use a paint from the Army Painter range here. This is called Topaz Skin, so we'll go ahead and apply that in 2 very thin coats. We want to make sure we're not clogging up the details of the face. And later, we'll use Agrax Earthshade over that in order to bring out the shadows and details. Now, here on the leathers, we're going to go back to Army Painter Strong Tone. This looks really good, brings out a lot of the shadow detail. And we'll also apply that over his armor, his pauldrons, the gorget, and those things to give them that patinaed look that we've achieved so far. With Hexbane's Hunters complete, who will be our Witch Hunter captain? It's Jelson Derrock from the Cursed City box set. So we're going to apply a couple different greens here. This is an olive drab green from Vallejo, followed up by a forest green from the bottom to create some visual interest. And then we're going to apply a wash all over of a Chthonian camo shade from Games Workshop. Now, once that's dry, we're going to dry brush that with a combination of olive drab and electric green to bring out our highlights, much like we did on Hexbane's coat. And then we'll move on to our metallics. So lead belcher applied over the hammer and the pauldrons. He's pretty lightly armored for a witch hunter. And then we'll go back to Mordheim Brown for our leathers. I really like the way this combination comes together with the Mordheim Brown and the Agrax Earthshade. For a little visual interest on the scabbard here, we're actually going to use Army Painter Pixie Pink mixed 1-to-1 with Fur Brown. That's going to knock the pink back and make sort of like a maroon color almost. And with all of our base colors blocked in, we'll start shading the model. Again, Agrax Earthshade over Mordheim Brown to finish up our leathers. We're going to let that pool in the recesses, add some definition to the shapes. And we'll do the same thing on the large satchel on his back as well. And then, like on the others, we'll switch over to Strong Tone on the metallics. It's hard to beat the patinaed effect that it creates. We'll work our way around the rest of the model, hitting a few small details like some gold elements on the buckles. He is our captain after all. And then we'll move on to his hat. This is deep gray from the Army Painter, excellent single coat coverage, and then we'll hit that with a quick dry brush to highlight it, much like we did on the coat. And then a few more minor details to finish the model, like the ends of these sharpened stakes. Then we'll paint the base to match the others, of course, Thunderhawk blue, followed by a quick dry brush of Fenrisian gray, and then a very generous wash of Coelia green shade. And to finish our warband, we will paint the rim of the base Administratum gray. Well, there you have it. We have taken our first steps into the grim and dangerous world of Mordheim with our very first warband, the Witch Hunters. Now, if you were wondering if there will be more warbands in the future, I can only say, what good are the hunters of the undead without the undead to hunt? Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. It was my genuine pleasure to make and share it with you. If you'd like to help out the channel, please like, comment, and subscribe. Help drive us to the front page of YouTube and share us on your socials. Or you can always join our Patreon, linked in the description below. Joining the Patreon at any level grants you access to our private Discord server where like-minded hobbyists help each other out every day with honest and kind feedback and receive early access to videos like this. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.